What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Thursday, February 20th edition of the Ship My Money Show. I'm your host, Adam Scherer. You can follow me on Twitter at ShipMyMoney DFS. First full slate back from the All-Star break. Hopefully you guys had a good break. Hopefully you won some money at MMA or NASCAR or some other dumb sport that we were forced to play. But NBA is back. Obviously came back yesterday with the showdown slate. But we have our first full slate here, 9 games. Not too much on the injury report. There are some really big names that if they were to not play would really matter. But fortunately, with these teams having the break, we don't have that many Q tags that we have to worry about. Obviously, I will still touch on the ones that need it. But for the most part, for a 9-game slate, at least right now, knock on wood, not as much up in the air injury-wise. So going to go through game by game, as always, looking at player exposures that I would have on DraftKings if the slate started right now. As always, take those with a grain of salt. They're going to change as ownership changes, as news comes in, all of that. But it does give us some perspective on what I see as priorities right now versus, spots that maybe the field's getting to and I don't like as much, or spots that I think are more secondary plays. I think it just kind of gives a little bit more perspective than just simply saying like, oh yeah, this guy's playable, that guy's playable. And, suddenly you like 8 guys from every single team. So going to do that as usual. If you are watching this back, as a reminder, you can see what game I'm on by which game is highlighted in the banner up here at the top. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications so you get alerts when our shows go live. Hit the thumbs up button on the video. All that stuff helps out quite a bit. Starting here with Boston taking on Philadelphia. No injuries of note for the Celtics. Almost called them the Red Sox, getting to that time of year. No injuries of note for the Celtics. Drew Holiday's in, Porzingis is in. So not surprisingly, you're not going to see too many priorities from this team. The one exception for me, to some extent, is Drew Holiday. He's only $4,400 here. I have him projected to play play normal minutes, 30, 31 minutes. This game has about a 7.5-point spread. So it's not a super close spread, but there are a few games on this slate that are 12, 13-point spreads. So kind of in the middle as far as spreads on this slate go. Looks like it's down to 7 points now. But Holiday is showing up for me. Not too far off the field. He's projected for about 15% ownership as well. So it does just look like a good value spot. He probably should be like 4,800, 5K, something like that. So you are getting a little bit of a discount here on Holiday. Obviously, when he does play with Derek White, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, Porzingis, he's not asked to take on a huge role offensively. You're hoping he gets there with some defensive stats and then just kind of puts together peripherals, scores enough, gets enough assists, gets enough rebounds, generally can do, pretty much everything on the floor relatively well, even if he's not going to be the Celtics leader in any one category any given night. The price tag is just pretty cheap for him. Outside of that, nothing that really looks great. Goes without saying that if you have lineups where you get to Jaylen Brown or Jason Tatum, there's nothing wrong with that, but they don't look like real priorities here. And then the other thing to keep in mind too, at least with the way that this slate looks right now, you don't have a ton of good, cheap value because these teams haven't played, outside of like Charlotte and the Lakers, these teams haven't played in so long that for the most part, prices have adjusted. You don't really have any surprise injuries. Like even Wemby, obviously we got the news that he's out for the season earlier today, but he was already listed as doubtful. He wasn't expected to play today anyway. So for the most part, pricing is just going to be a little bit tighter on this slate. And that's why you see ownership coming into somebody like Holiday at 4,400 that, even though he's a little bit mispriced on a lot of slates would kind of just still be like a 5 to 10% owned guy. That stands out. That mispricing stands out a little bit more on a slate like this. And then the other side of that coin is that it makes getting to, kind of luxury options like Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum on teams that are fully healthy a little bit more difficult than when you have those slates where there's just abundant value everywhere and you can afford to overpay, quote unquote, in a couple spots in your lineup because salaries just aren't very tight. That's not the case right now. So it does make it more difficult to get to them. But again, goes without saying, they do have high ceilings. If you fit one of them into a lineup, great. For the Sixers, relatively healthy as far as the main pieces go. They are missing peripheral pieces that don't really do too much in terms of affecting other players. Justin Edwards is out. Eric Gordon is out. Kyle Lowry is out. So those guys missing does open up minutes, but you still have Paul George available. You have Joel Embiid in. So on the spectrum of ways that the Sixers rotation can look and has looked over the course of, the last month or even the course of the season, it's a relatively unappealing version of the Sixers, because you've had so many games where like you're missing Lowry, you're missing Gordon, but you're also missing Embiid, or you're also missing George or whatever. So you have minutes available and you have usage available. Here it's just, yeah, Kelly Oubre is probably still going to play a bunch of minutes. Tyrese Maxey is going to play a bunch of minutes, but you're contending with Joel Embiid's usage. That obviously knocks Maxey down at least a little bit in terms of median projection. It has absolutely killed Paul George so far this season. Whenever Joel Embiid has played, those two have not been able to get on the same page, and it's been reflected in Paul George's per minute production. It's been reflected in his true shooting. Like everything has just been really bad for Paul George when he's been on the floor with Embiid. So basically, I think what you're getting here, and you can see it in the ownership, while I'm not getting to anything from the Sixers right now, and this is in part also because I do discount projections on the earliest games on slates like this, where I do want flexibility to late swap, essentially a little bit of a tiebreaker where even if we don't get unexpected injury news later in the day, which, obviously we wouldn't know that because it would be unexpected, but you just still also get to make decisions with more information later on in the slate. So, as an example, if I think that Jaylen Brown and some 8K guy playing at 9:00 are basically the same play at the same ownership, I'm going to always prefer the 9:00 guy just because it gives me more options later in the slate when I have a better idea of how my teams are doing, how the field in general is doing, more starting lineups, all of that stuff. So that's another reason too why when you see these like 5 to 10% owned guys on Boston or on Philly, I'm a little bit less likely to be getting to them unless I really like them. Quentin Grimes, I think, looks fine. 5K, should play low to mid 30s in minutes. Shooting guard, small forward eligible is nice. Joel Embiid obviously gives you a really high ceiling. One thing I will mention with Embiid is that in his last game before the break, he actually played 38 minutes in regulation. I still have him projected for like 32 and a half here. That's a combination of what he normally plays, and then it's also a function of relative blowout risk in this game as well. I don't, I want to see it a couple more times before I just start saying, okay, they are really just going all out with Joel Embiid now. He's going to play, a million minutes every game. I'm tempted to think that was more of an outlier than anything, but it is, worth noting just from like a ceiling standpoint. He did play 38 in his last game. So, maybe that is what they're going to do. Maybe he does start at least playing like 35, 36 more often. So obviously there is plenty of upside for Embiid, but I'm not getting to him. Memphis taking on Indiana. Again, healthy Memphis team, which usually means that they don't look very good. And they still, I don't think, really have true priorities today, but they do look a little bit better than they normally do, just because we have seen them ramping up the minutes on Desmond Bane, on John Morant. Jaren Jackson's been playing relatively big minutes for a while now. So while you do still have a deep rotation, they have a lot of good NBA players. They're all healthy. It's tough to look at this team and say, oh, well, I think they're going to kick this guy out of the rotation and give more minutes to everyone else, because everybody in the rotation deserves to be playing minutes in the NBA. But you have at least seen the starters start to play more, whereas earlier in the season, you were just consistently getting 28, 29 minutes from Ja, from Bane, Jackson playing upper 20s. Now you're getting low to mid 30s from those guys, even when they have been healthy. So they do look a little bit better, but prices have come up too. So the ceiling for Ja at 8,500 obviously is high. He is getting 8% ownership. I'm getting to 8%. I don't have a problem with that. Same goes for Jaren Jackson, getting 9% ownership at 8,100. Bane getting 12% at 7,500. I'm a little bit below the field there, probably just because it's a 7:00 game and there's no shortage of, $7,500 guards at double-digit ownership that I can get to. But any of Morant, Jackson, Bane, I think look fine. Santi Aldama at 4,500, getting 14% ownership right now. That's really just a function of the way injuries look on this slate right now and how starved we are for value. I think he's fine, but I think there's going to be plenty of other guys on a 9-game slate that give you a similar range of outcomes. Aldama is live to close. The closing lineup here for Memphis is generally going to be Jaren Jackson, Ja Morant, Desmond Bane, and then 2 other guys. A lot of times it will be Aldama over Edey, and then you can get last game it was last game he played, rather, it was Vince Williams over Jalen Wells. But that wing spot, can end up being Williams. It can end up being Wells. Maybe you get some GG Jackson occasionally. You could certainly get Kennard at times. There's a lot of ways that the closing lineup can go. And Aldama, is relatively likely to find his way into it. So I understand why the field likes him, but I just, again, think that there's enough alternatives that's the spot where I can give up some ownership and just kind of throw darts at other spots. But point per dollar wise, he does look fine. You can see I have him projected for 25 fantasy points. He's 4,500. I have him projected for about 22 minutes. So no real issue with it. I think it's just the ownership kind of pushing me away. And then Vince Williams here, 3,100 shooting guard, small forward. Again, function of the slate, but at least he's only 3% owned. He did get into the closing lineup last game. He's still only been playing like mid-teens in minutes. I only have him projected for 16 minutes. I only have him projected for 14 fantasy points. He probably goes away if like any sort of other value opens up. But at the same time, like in the last game where everybody was in for Memphis, he played more minutes than GG Jackson did. And Vince Williams, again, is a solid player. We've seen him in previous seasons play, big roles on this team when he's healthy. So I don't view Vince Williams as just like some throw in here for Memphis. I think that you do see him, continue to play relevant minutes for a min salary guy. So it's mostly just the ownership pushing him up. Obviously, I don't have him projected well, but I do think there's some volatility there, which is nice. So I'm getting to him a little bit right now as a way to differentiate. Nobody getting ownership other than those 5 guys that I'm getting to at least a little bit of. Brandon Clark getting 1.5%, 3,600 center only. If he were power forward eligible, I'd be a little bit more interested, but I think it's pretty tough to use a center spot on him. That's another thing with Vince Williams. Like, again, I don't have him projected well, but I'm a lot more willing to just kind of punt like a small forward spot or a shooting guard spot than a center spot because the opportunity cost is just going to be lower. Indiana on the other side of a game that, does have a high total as well. This is another, again, just this could go away. I'm getting the 14% TJ McConnell right now. He's 4,100. I have him projected for 15 and a half minutes. This is basically just, he's not Santi Aldama. He's in that price range. He's getting like 1/13 the ownership. So he's just falling into some lineups. It's not that I think he's a great play. Like this could just be anybody else that, projects for 18, 19, 20 fantasy points in this price range at no ownership. But it is a game that's likely to be high scoring. He is a good point per minute guy. You just have to find the minutes for him, which has been very difficult when this team is healthy. You have Nesmith back, you have Mathurin, you have Halliburton, you have Nembhard. It's tough for McConnell to find minutes. He's generally playing, like low to mid-teens in minutes. But I've said it on, a million shows over the years. I do in large field tournaments, if I am going to just go with like the low-owned, inexpensive guy and hope to get lucky, at least with somebody like McConnell, I really just need to get lucky on the minutes. He's going to produce when he's on the floor. Like he is generally a good point per minute guy. I prefer guys like that if I'm going to just hope to get lucky and hope things break my way. At least I only have to get lucky once with somebody like McConnell, as opposed to, you could pick some other guys that are projected for 15 minutes, but they're like, 0.8 or 0.75 fantasy point per minute guys. And then it's like, well, even if he gets to 18 minutes, he probably still sucks. If McConnell gets to 18 minutes, he's probably at 20 something fantasy points. So it's the point per minute component combined with the ownership that's pushing him up a little bit right now. But again, if any other news breaks, he probably gets pushed out of lineups pretty quickly. Miles Turner at 6K looks like a pretty solid center option, likely to give you 30 plus minutes here. I have him at 31 and a half. I actually didn't realize I was that high on him. I thought I was at 31. So I'm double checking that real quick, but yeah, no, I have him at 31 and a half. So I am a little bit higher than the industry on his minutes there, but he has been in a decent amount of blowouts lately when he has played, also has dealt with some injuries. I do think that, if this game is competitive and he's able to avoid foul trouble, he is probably playing low 30s in minutes. So getting to him a bit, and then it's small amounts of Mathurin, Nembhard, Nesmith, Siakam. The field is getting to Siakam a bit at 7,800. Again, I just think that there's plenty of guys that look similar to him. If I were to get a little bit more by lock, that's fine. But if I'm not getting as much. I'm not overly concerned about it. Generally going to play around 33 minutes or so. Nesmith started last game, immediately got in foul trouble. I assume he's starting again today, but you're still most likely going to get a split in playing time between him and Benedict Mathurin. It is pretty likely, just based on what we've seen in general this season, even when Nesmith starts, that Mathurin comes out on the higher end of the playing time. So I'm not overly excited about getting to Nesmith, even though, at 3,700, assuming he is starting, he does project pretty well point per dollar wise, and we do need value. He's just not somebody that I'm overly concerned about getting burned by, given that his role essentially is playing defense. You don't need him to do a lot offensively when you have Halliburton, when you have Siakam, when you have Miles Turner. Nesmith is out there more to defend. He'll probably see, plenty of John Morant, which comes with foul risk too. But again, I think he's a fine point per dollar play, but I can just find other spots, that I can pivot to. Cleveland taking on Brooklyn. Cleveland does have a couple of Q tags here that are semi-relevant. Q tag on Okoro, Q tag on Ty Jerome. Dean Wade is still out, though it does look like he will be back soon. If one or both of Okoro, Jerome are out, then you are probably just looking at like minutes becoming available for Jalen Tyson, maybe a little bit more playing time for the combination of Strus and Hunter, maybe some more playing time, like if they're both out, for Craig Porter Jr. But right now, with those guys projected in, I don't really have anything standing out from Brooklyn. I think Jared Allen at 6,500 is fine. If you wanted to use him as like a pivot from 15% on Miles Turner at $500 more in some lineups, I think that would make a lot of sense. But you just have a fully healthy Cleveland team. It makes it difficult to really prioritize. Small amounts of ownership coming into Mitchell, Allen, Strus, Jerome, Garland, even less to Mobley at 8,400. So overall, I think Cleveland's just one of those teams where, we've said this about Cleveland a lot this season. When they're not missing anybody, and especially in a game like this where they are double-digit favorites against a much worse Brooklyn team as well, there's nothing wrong with just grabbing one of these guys and saying like, hey, Cleveland has 100 good players on their team. Maybe one of them probably will have a good game today. The issue with prioritizing any of them is there's nothing you can do to say like, this is Donovan Mitchell day, or it is Darius Garland today, or it is Evan Mobley today. So you have a bunch of guys that just project pretty mediocre relative to their salaries. You have a team that likes to play relatively flat minutes for their starters when they have the opportunity to do so, which they do when they're essentially healthy and they're big favorites. And so you just have a lot of risk in being wrong at price tags that you really can't afford to be wrong at when you go to any of these guys. Whereas, on other teams that have fantasy production more distributed in a more concentrated way, you can prioritize those guys a little bit easier. So, mixing any of these guys into tournament lineups here and there is going to be perfectly fine. They all have ceilings, but none of them stand out to me as priorities. On the Brooklyn side, this is where, DFS just kind of can get weird. Obviously, all things equal, I would prefer to be having a bunch of Cavs in my lineup against Brooklyn as opposed to a bunch of Nets against the Cavs. But we do have a Brooklyn team that's missing a lot of people here, and you have pretty favorable salaries as well. For the Nets, no Q tags here, but no Reese Beekman, no Bogdanovich, Claxton's available, no Noah Clowney, no Tosin, Melton's still out, no Cam Thomas, no Whitehead. So having the G League guys not available, especially Tosin, who has been in the rotation for, I don't know, a month or two now, I think, it does open up some minutes here where you have Trendon Watford back. I assume he's coming off the bench, but he's probably playing like 22 to 24 minutes, somewhere in that range. He is only 4K. He's getting 20% ownership. I'm north of that right now. I'm right around the field on a $5,800 D'Angelo Russell, probably playing, 25, 26 minutes, somewhere in there. If this game is competitive, it probably gets higher than that. But, factoring in the spread, I still got him to 26 minutes. Keon Johnson getting 12% ownership. Cam Johnson getting 16%. I am below the field on those two guys, but I'm, even with the field on Russell, I'm over the field on Watford. I'm not getting to as much Williams or Claxton as the field either. So I think, again, it's kind of an ownership thing. It's an early game thing. And this is a team that has like a 105 team total. They're playing a very good defensive team in Cleveland. I don't mind overall not having a ton of popular nets in this spot because, again, I think I can just find other players that maybe don't project quite as well point per dollar, but that range of outcomes wise are very similar and lower owned. But Watford, to me, the one that really does stand out because it is difficult to find guys, at this 4K price tag on this slate right now. He does have MPE, even though obviously the power forward spot is more valuable than the center spot. And I also like that he kind of just has multiple paths to getting minutes. I think that he's firmly in the rotation here, but taking Tosin out opens up additional minutes. He probably plays garbage time minutes if you get those, because Brooklyn is missing so many guys. Like, you don't expect Claxton to play garbage time. You don't expect Cam Johnson to play it. You don't expect D'Angelo Russell to play it. Keon Johnson could, Zaire Williams could, but like, you're probably looking at Watford, Martin, Maxwell Lewis, Sharp, Jalen Wilson would be like my best guess at who's getting garbage time. And I think like Jalen Wilson could be Keon Johnson. It could be Zaire Williams, but like, I'd be surprised if like Keon Johnson is getting garbage time over Watford or Zaire Williams is getting it over Watford. Like, if those guys get it, it's probably over like Wilson or something. Not that that's, a guarantee, but there's just a lot of ways for him to get minutes. He's firmly in the rotation, and then also I think probably just soaks up whatever garbage time there is as well. So I do like getting to Watford quite a bit. Orlando taking on Atlanta in Atlanta. No Q tags on the Orlando injury report. Pretty much status quo for them. No Mo Wagner, no Jalen Suggs, and then no Mac McClung or Ethan Thompson. Not that those guys matter. So you are getting ownership coming into Banchero and Franz Wagner. 14% to Banchero, 13% to Wagner. I'm a little below the field on both, but again, I think they're solid enough plays. Mid 8K price tags pretty much look correct. But there's just, plenty of other spots I can get to. If you want to play these guys and have lower owned guys elsewhere, that's fine. The ceiling is obviously high for them. You're generally getting 33, 34 minutes. We did see 37 from Wagner in his last competitive game. I don't think that's going to be the norm, but it is certainly something that can happen. Goga has been starting, barely playing, or not barely playing, but basically playing like 3 stints. If you get a little bit of him at 4,600, I don't hate it, just because there's probably some game between like now and the end of the season where he actually plays 26 or 27 minutes. There's no indication it's today. It's not a spot that I would want, a lot of money allocated to or anything like that. But the first game that it does happen, assuming it eventually happens, you're just going to get him at 1% ownership, and it's going to look really good. So again, I'm not suggesting that it happens today, but I think that getting a little bit of him is fine. Wendell Carter, 4,100, same kind of thing. One thing that does suck as far as the split goes is you can get a 48-minute split where, like, I think in the last game, Carter got up to 28 minutes, but they don't always do it. They've been giving Jonathan Isaac some minutes at the 5. So you're not getting a true 48-minute split from Carter and Goga. So it's not like you can say, well, if Goga plays 21, Carter plays 27, you're likely to just kind of get relatively unappealing playing time for both of them, but there is volatility there that still makes them playable. You are just, you have to keep in mind you're using the center position as well. And then Cole Anthony, 1% ownership, 5,100. He has been starting, but also basically playing the Goga rotations where Anthony Black is typically closing over Cole Anthony. And so you're getting like 21, 22 minutes from Anthony. You're getting Anthony Black playing mid-20s off the bench, but he's up to 5,200, so it's hard to get there. Overall, the Magic are a relatively difficult team to get to. I think Banchero and Wagner, certainly the guys you would feel the best about getting to. I'm getting a little bit of $3,400 Jonathan Isaac as well, so is the field. Klebo said, is Killian Hayes available? I'm actually not sure. I don't think it matters a ton outside of what I was just saying about garbage time, probably. Like, I gave Maxwell Lewis minutes that could easily just become Killian Hayes. He's not in the player pool, so I'm actually not sure, but that is potentially another body. Not that I necessarily think would be in the rotation. Like, I think Tosin is probably replaced by one of Maxwell Lewis or Killian Hayes. It is Brooklyn, so I mean, they could just go to a deeper rotation, I guess. But my assumption is that you just get one of those guys in the rotation. On the Atlanta side, tough matchup for them as far as Orlando being a good defensive team. Not much ownership coming in here. Trae Young getting 10%, 9,400. It's Trae Young. If you get there, cool. Karis LeVert, 5,300. I assume still coming off the bench, but he has generally been playing big minutes since coming to Atlanta, likely to give you, 28 to 30 minutes. But he is up to 5,300. Shooting guard, small forward eligibility is useful, but again, not really showing up much for me. Niang, 4,300, probably coming off the bench, probably playing 28 minutes or so. If you get him in a lineup here or there, it's fine, but you're not going to be too confident in him either. Clint Capella is supposedly playing today. He's not on the injury report. They said they think he's going to play. If he ends up not playing, then you do give a little bit more playing time to Onekwa Okongwu. You don't have Larry Nance still, so you wouldn't really have a true backup center. It would turn into like Dominic Barlow. But again, indications are that Capella is going to be back, which means that you're expecting like 28 to 29 minutes from Okongwu at 6,100. Kind of similar to like Jared Allen, where if you want to use him as a pivot to Miles Turner at a lot more ownership, that's fine. But, I do think Turner projects a little bit better. DC24 said, just want to make sure I'm not missing the projections today. Just assuming you didn't send it out yet on Dub Club. Yeah, I didn't send them out yet. They'll be out right after the show. I was just trying to wrap them up and ran out of time before the show. But when they do come out, they will be either close to fully updated or fully updated. So, they'll be out pretty much as soon as the show ends. Nothing else showing up for me from Atlanta. Nothing else really showing up for the field either. Dyson Daniels at 7K, relatively expensive. Does give you defensive stat upside, which is nice. It's a way that he can contribute fantasy points without it being a situation where like he has to be taking points from Trae Young or something like that. It does give you some volatility that isn't automatically baked into the spread, but also it's baked into his price at this point. We're in late February. Dyson Daniels has been racking up defensive stats all season long. It's not, a surprise or anything like that. Before we move on to Chicago and the Knicks, I will take the opportunity from DC to segue into, if you are looking for my NBA projections or NBA projections in general that don't cost you as much as a lot of NBA projections do, you can sign up for mine using the link in the description below. There is a 3-day free trial with it, so that would get you, through the weekend. I post them every weekday, and then also whatever weekends I am playing, which is pretty much all of them. It's a spreadsheet that updates as I update my own, shows how many minutes I'm projecting guys for, their fantasy projection, if I think they're starting. Also, for DraftKings has live projections, so whenever I go to late swap, I put in the live projections I'm using based on how guys have started their respective games. So that is available using that link in the description below. Also, if you are signed up for Endgame Syndicate, which I highly recommend, they are included there, no additional cost. I post them in Discord over there. So check those out. And again, if you haven't signed up for Endgame Syndicate, I would recommend that as well. A lot of good strategy videos, evergreen videos over there from Utical, Brick75, Nerdy Tenor, and myself, just talking about different things that we do that we think give us an advantage at various sports or just in general. We do monthly roundtables answering questions from subscribers. So a lot of good content over there that I think saves you money in the long run, helps you get better, stop making mistakes, saves you some time, being able to learn from mistakes that we've all made over the years. So check that out as well. Now, moving on to the Bulls and Knicks. Tim said if LeVert hits the starting lineup, he'd be a lot higher. Yeah, kind of. The thing to keep in mind is that Karis LeVert can disappear. He... Like when he was on Cleveland, for example, if you put him on the floor with Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell, he's essentially like a zero. So like if he's starting for Atlanta, you do expect more minutes, but you also, it just means he's playing a lot of minutes with Trae Young, which isn't ideal for him. So yes, he will look better if he's starting. His ownership will definitely come up. His projection will come up because his minutes come up. But it's still a situation where like he gets hurt pretty badly when you take him from being the guy that has the ball in his hands versus the guy that doesn't. So that would be something to keep in mind. But also, I'm not expecting him to start. Like, obviously, Trae Young is starting. Dyson Daniels is starting. So, like, he could, but I'm not expecting him to. If I stay on the Excel page, will it update automatically or should it be refreshed after news breaks, projections are updated? So it should automatically refresh. I assume you're saying like once I've actually posted the link for the day, it should automatically refresh. I can't guarantee that since I see a different view than you, but I haven't had anybody say that it doesn't. I intended to set it up so that it would. There is a timestamp on it that updates whenever I update my spreadsheet. So, yeah, as far as I know, it auto updates and you don't have to do anything. But I guess there's some chance that I'm wrong just because I can't see it. But yeah, as far as I know, it auto updates. Chicago taking on the Knicks in New York. Obviously, Zach LaVine is gone. Lonzo Ball is back. I assume he is starting, and Buzelis is coming off the bench. I don't think it matters a ton as far as if Buzelis is starting. I assume he's playing like upper 20s in minutes, and Lonzo's playing like mid 20s off the bench. If Lonzo's starting, I assume they're both playing like mid 20s. So I don't think it matters a ton here. As you can see, I'm not really getting to Lonzo even with him projected to start. He's getting 2% ownership, but Vucevic does look fine. $7,700 price tag is relatively inexpensive for him. Obviously gives you a high ceiling. Kobe White playing without Zach LaVine, but most importantly, arguably, shooting guard, small forward eligible for Kobe White. So it is just easier to get him into lineups. The opportunity cost goes down a little bit. And, if this game is competitive, Kobe White, one, is probably, a reason why. Like, he's probably playing relatively well. And then two, you can see over here that I have him projected for 32 and a half minutes. If this game's actually competitive, he's probably playing 34, 35 minutes. He does generally see an uptick in playing time on average without LaVine. And the thing to keep in mind with the Bulls, too, is a lot of teams at the trade deadline, they moved a big piece, but then they replaced it with something else. Like the Kings, for example, moved the Aaron Fox, but then you replace those minutes more or less with Zach LaVine. The Bulls didn't bring back anything of note. So those Zach LaVine minutes do get redistributed to some combination of Josh Giddey, Lonzo Ball, Buzelis, Kobe White, and then obviously the smaller pieces they brought in, Kevin Huerter, Trey Jones. But it does open the door for White to play a little bit more. It opens the door for Giddey to potentially play a little bit more. 6% projected ownership coming into Giddey. I'm getting to 12% for him. Probably playing around 30 minutes or so. Could play a little bit more if the game ends up being competitive. But I just like the lack of ownership coming into him. Also, the Bulls in general are showing up pretty well in my play type model. Vucevic, I have it as an above average matchup for him from a scoring standpoint. Same goes for Giddey. Same goes for White. So I'm not sure off the top of my head what it is specifically as far as what the Knicks don't do well and what those guys do a lot of, but they are all just showing up as it being a pretty solid spot for them from a scoring standpoint. So that's, not hurting either. And then the Sunmu should be in the starting lineup at 5,600, probably playing low 30s in minutes. Obviously not the best point per minute guy, but last guy in, perfectly fine. Nobody else, getting ownership on this team, and I don't really think that anybody else should be. For the Knicks, this is going to be a very popular team today, and deservedly so. No Josh Hart, and we know that while he has only missed one game this season, we do know that Tibbs' tendency in general when his main pieces are out is to just give more minutes to his other main pieces. OG Anunoby is also questionable as well. I have Anunoby projected in for right now, but if he were to be out, then you're also looking at more playing time for Miles McBride, who I assume would move into the starting lineup. You probably get some more minutes where Jalen Brunson and Cameron Payne play alongside each other. So with Anunoby projected in, but knowing Hart is out, already getting to a ton of Karl Anthony Towns here. $9,700 price tag, 20% ownership. I am well over the field on that. I'm a little bit higher on his minutes than the industry in general. And it's just what we've seen from the Knicks. I think that, obviously we only have the one game where Josh Hart was out, like I said, but we did just have OG Anunoby miss 5 games. And from a macro standpoint, just kind of looking at this and saying, what do I think the Knicks are going to do with their rotation standpoint? I think OG Anunoby and Josh Hart are pretty interchangeable for those purposes. And you got like 38 minutes per game from Karl Anthony Towns in the games that Anunoby missed. We've seen him, even in games where he ends up not playing as many minutes. There was a game, I don't remember if it was the one with Hart out or if it was one of the early ones with Anunoby out, but Towns got in foul trouble in the second half, so his actual playing time wasn't as high as it would have been, but he played like 21 minutes in the first half. Like, you've just seen huge minutes from Towns, because what happens is Precious Achiuwa is playing more minutes alongside Towns, so you don't have to worry about getting Precious Achiuwa those backup minutes. Maybe Huck Porty plays a rotation, maybe he doesn't, but it just opens more minutes for Towns. And then also in this case, Josh Hart, even though he's a guard / wing, really good rebounder as well. So you do have more rebounds to go around. Whereas like when Anunoby's out, and this isn't a knock on Anunoby, but like it doesn't necessarily open up more production in any one given category for other guys on the Knicks. You're taking out a guy in Josh Hart that relatively often is grabbing double-digit rebounds, and those are going to get redistributed to Cat, to Achiuwa, obviously to the other pieces of the Knicks as well. So this matchup, the fact that Hart is out, everything just looks really, really good for Cat. Have him projected for 36.5 minutes. And as a reminder, like, that's factoring in the spread here. So yes, there is a relatively big spread in this game, but I think if this game actually goes down to the wire and, he avoids foul trouble and stuff, you're probably getting like 39, 40 minutes. So that is, discounting for the spread. So I love getting the Cat here. There's just so much to like. Precious Achiuwa, I assume, starts. He's 5,700, power forward, center eligible, getting 26% ownership. I'm a little over the field there as well. He's played huge minutes in the games that he has started this year. And just like I was saying with Cat, Achiuwa being in a position to just play a lot of minutes alongside Cat just really opens up the opportunity for him to play a ton. If Miles McBride were to start instead of Achiuwa, then McBride probably plays a ton and Achiuwa probably plays mid-20s off the bench. But I assume that Achiuwa is going to get the start and he's going to look pretty good. Jalen Brunson, 8,400, 22% ownership. I got to 16%. He doesn't necessarily get the big playing time bump that other guys do. We haven't really seen that, with Anunoby out, for example, but he still, obviously in some games can play upper 30s in minutes. He's still a good point per minute guy. It's still a very good matchup. 8,400 is a reasonable price tag, so I'm fine getting there. Cameron Payne is showing up because he's only 3,300. He should probably be like 3,800 or something like that. I have him projected to basically just play when Brunson's not on the floor, plus like a minute or two. He could play, a little bit more. Basically, you could get like Shamet playing a rotation, or you could just get Shamet DNP and Payne plays a little bit more. I projected Shamet to at least sort of be in the rotation. So I think that Payne at that salary is fine. It's mostly just a function of the slate and the fact that he is a little bit underpriced. Probably, again, should be like 3,800 or something like that. So he's fine. Anunoby, McBride, Bridges, I think if you get to them as secondary plays, I don't have any issue with it. But also, not priorities for me. Anunoby getting 12% ownership, Bridges at 8%, McBride at 7%. I think any of those guys are fine, but I am prioritizing some other pieces, particularly Cat and Achiuwa. The boy from Cali said thoughts on Shamet. From a DFS standpoint, I don't have any. Like, I don't know for sure that he's in the rotation. He's certainly, like, for Landry Shamet, you need him playing, probably 28 minutes to be somebody that you actually would want. He's not a good point per minute guy anyway. So, like, even if Anunoby's out, I don't think I'd be getting to Shamet. I think I'd be giving more minutes to Brunson, giving more minutes to Payne, giving more minutes to McBride. Shamet at that point would probably play like, 16, 18, 20 minutes. But like, even if Anunoby's out, I doubt that I'm playing Landry Shamet. Clippers taking on Milwaukee. The Clippers are relatively healthy. Kawhi is back. Norm Powell is questionable. So that does matter. If he's out, you probably get Amir Coffey moving into the starting lineup. But there are other guys it could be as well. It could be Derek Jones. It could be Bogdanovich. It could be Simmons. Like, I don't know what exactly they would do. This is kind of a new Clippers team. They added Ben Simmons. They added Bogdanovich. We've seen Ben Simmons play one game, and he did cut into Zubac's playing time quite a bit. I hope that was matchup based. I don't know. But Zubac's only played like 25 minutes. Ben Simmons was playing a lot of minutes instead of him. Ben Simmons played overtime instead of Zubac's. That is something that I want to pay a lot of attention to and adjust pretty quickly if we see that really becoming a trend. But For this slate, I don't think that really matters a ton. Zubats at 7,500 isn't really getting ownership. I'm not getting to him anyway. I did project him for 31 minutes. That is with a little bit of a haircut for because of Ben Simmons. Normally, I would have like a 32 and a half, 33-minute projection somewhere around there on Zubats. So I did give him a little bit of a haircut because of Simmons closing over him last game. And then now you also have, more bodies available. You have Kawhi back, all of that. But for now, I'm still projecting Zubats to, clearly be the guy. But I don't know. We will have to keep an eye on what they're doing with Simmons as it relates to Zubats. Kawhi's the guy getting ownership here. And I am surprised I'm not getting more because I do have him projected for 31 and a half minutes. We've seen him playing real minutes now. And so I don't really know why I'm not getting more of him. I guess it's just probably, again, that he's getting 16% ownership, and I think he's a good play, but I think there's plenty of other guys that give you a similar range of outcomes. But I do think he's underpriced at 7,100. You can see over a 5x projection on him. Ceiling is certainly there. So I like Kawhi, even though I'm not really getting to him much. Outside of that, it's tough for me to get too much of anything else. Clearly, if you get to some James Harden, that's fine. If you get to some Powell, that's fine. But nothing else is really going to stand out from this team with them at full strength. Kawhi would be the piece that I want the most of. On the Milwaukee side, Q tags for basically the whole team, or at least the relevant pieces of it. Giannis is questionable. Damian Lillard is questionable. Andre Jackson, much less important, also questionable. Bobby Portis not playing. For anybody that missed that news, he is suspended for 25 games for taking the wrong pain medication, apparently. So sucks for him, but it does make things a little bit more interesting for the Bucks. I mentioned, that I'm surprised I'm not getting more Kawhi, and maybe I will later. I'm surprised I'm not getting more of the Bucks, and maybe I will later. But my minutes projection on Giannis, on Dame, on Kuzma, and on Lopez are all higher than I've seen across the industry, which usually means that I'm getting to those guys. But I guess in this case, on this slate, it's just still that they're not really mispriced. Like Giannis at 11.5 is still going to be tough to get to, even if I'm a minute and a half higher. Same for Dame at 9,500, assuming Giannis is back. Like you've seen Dame's salary adjust up because of Giannis being out. So I guess that's why I'm still not really getting there. But we have seen, and keep in mind, this team is a little bit different since they added Kuzma. They don't have Middleton now, but we have seen in the handful of games that Bobby Portis missed this year, Brook Lopez averaging like 34 and a half, 35 minutes per game. Giannis playing like 37 minutes, Dame playing like 38 minutes. Kuzma, has played like mid 30s since joining the team and moving into the starting lineup. So I do think that there is the potential for a lot of playing time from Kuzma, Lopez, Giannis, and Lillard. The other question mark is health, but I assume that, if Giannis is playing, if Dame is playing, they're just good to go at this point. So I do like the minutes. I do like the playing time upside for those guys. It just comes back to their prices and the fact that, Giannis and Dame, for the sake of what I'm assuming right now, are both active and all of that. Kuzma is showing up 12% for me at 6,500. Ownership is non-existent. So, I think this is a spot where I don't have him projected as a great play at all. Playing with Giannis, playing with Dame is obviously going to cut into his fantasy production, but at no ownership when, pretty much anybody playable seems to be getting like 10 to 20% ownership today. I don't mind just, getting to some of him. I think he's playing mid 30s in minutes. I don't with Portis out. There's just so many minutes still available. If you're not going mid 30s in minutes to Kuzma, you're getting pretty aggressive, I think, with some combination of Taurean Prince, Gary Trent, AJ Green. There's nothing to suggest that any of those guys are taking minutes from Kyle Kuzma, I don't think. So assuming that Kuzma is starting, and that's another assumption, we don't know what the starting lineup actually is here. My assumption is that Taurean Prince is moving to the bench, or maybe Andre Jackson moves to the bench. But assuming Kuzma is starting, I think he's playing very big minutes, and I'm interested. If he's coming off the bench, that would be enough of a minutes drop for me where I don't think I would get to him. But for now, I am getting some Kuzma. I'm getting a lineup with Brook Lopez. Overall, tough team to get to, which again is just illustrated by the fact that I'm projecting all the main pieces basically higher than other places are and still not getting to them at low ownership. As more value opens up, obviously it gets easier to get to Giannis and Dame, but we don't necessarily have more value coming either. Charlotte taking on Denver. This is going to be ugly, but it does set up as a good spot for DFS. LaMelo is out. Mark Williams is out. They are like 100-point underdogs. But there's just minutes available for an inexpensive team. Now, there are question marks on exactly what this rotation is going to look like. There were question marks going into yesterday's game that, sort of got answered, but then you have new ones today with no LaMelo and no Williams. Going into yesterday's game, they did say that they see Nurkic as the backup center and then Diabate, basically as the third guy. They mentioned wanting to be somewhat cautious with Nurkic's minutes. He played like 18 minutes. So I do have him projected to start here without Williams. He started the last game before the All-Star break. He still only played like 17 and a half minutes in that game. I have him projected for 21 minutes here. You could probably go a little bit lower, but I think that there's, like some chance he plays 23, 24. There's also some chance he plays 17, 18. So kind of just landing at like 21 minutes, I think makes sense. Most industry sites, I think, are in that range as well. So that's something too that I always, on a spot like this, I kind of try and keep in mind, where I know there's a lot of volatility and I don't have a really strong opinion on like, oh, I definitely think Nurkic is playing, 24 minutes, or I definitely think he's playing 16 minutes. I'm fine kind of just trying to like be in the same range as the industry. And especially like in a spot like this, where he's getting 19% ownership and I'm getting the 32%. If I went back and look and like everywhere's projecting him for 18 minutes, I probably would just like knock a couple minutes off, because I don't want to be getting Nurkic solely because I decided 21 is the number and, when it could be 18. But with somebody like Nurkic, if, I'm projecting him similarly to the industry, the field in general, I'm perfectly fine getting a lot of him. He is a good point per minute guy. He is very cheap at 4,300. We don't have a lot of value on the slate. So knowing that, I'm not just like making shit up and going way over his minutes projection. I didn't miss anything there. I am fine getting to him. Same thing with Peyton here. He's 4K. He started the last game LaMelo was out. He played 31 minutes in that game. I have him projected for 27 here. There's a lot of volatility there. Certainly could play 31 again, but also there's plenty of ways he doesn't. 27 minutes, I think very reasonable here. And at 4K, it's just going to get him into a lot of lineups on this slate that is lacking value. Nick Smith is interesting to me at 4,500. Shooting guard, small forward, only getting 4% ownership. Like, this is just an ownership thing to me. I don't think he's a great play. Again, you can see the projection here that I have him in for 29 and a half minutes, which is about what he's been averaging in games without LaMelo and without Brandon Miller, where he has started. He does have the upside to play more if the game goes well, but obviously there is some subset of games where either he plays poorly and loses minutes, or like is pretty likely to happen tonight, they just get the shit kicked out of them and he loses some minutes. But on average, expecting 29 to 30 minutes from him is reasonable. And it's just their ownership thing. Like, if the field's going to go to other guys around 4,500 that are very comparable to Nick Smith, and they're going to be a lot more popular, I'll just play Nick Smith and hope to run well there. Miles Bridges at 8,700, 9% ownership. The offense should essentially be running through him with no LaMelo, with no Miller. The risk is that, this game or this team does have a 104 implied total. They are huge underdogs on a back-to-back in Denver. So there is, a pretty decent chance that you get like, a very disappointing game from Bridges just from a playing time standpoint. But the flip side to that, the upside to that, is that if Charlotte does hang in this game, one, it's probably because Miles Bridges is playing really well. And then two, he probably plays like 36 minutes if they actually hang in this game. So Bridges in tournaments, I have no problem with. Ideally, I think I would be pairing him with guys from Denver. So of 6 Miles Bridges lineups, 1 has Westbrook, nobody else from Denver. So that's a little disappointing. But again, you are talking about a Denver team where like Jokic obviously is expensive. Jamal Murray is relatively expensive. So I understand why it's not happening more, but in a perfect world, I think you'd be pairing him with Denver guys. Salon at 3,700, perfectly fine differentiation play. If you're looking to get away from, for example, like Aaron Nesmith or something like that at half the ownership. So pretty ugly team here, but I think Peyton and Nurkic are value priorities for the field and for me. And then at least for right now, Nick Smith's the spot where I'm able to get different for value. Arcathelza said, I think I'm going McBride if he starts, but if not, I'm probably switching him to Payton. Yeah, I mean, if McBride starts, like I still would be playing Payton, and then I would also just be playing McBride and, using as many value pieces as I can to get to actual good players I want. But it would, like, if McBride starts, then Payton's ownership and how much you have of him probably should come down at least a little bit because you have somebody else that's very comparable in terms of range of outcomes. Is Ball, Simpson, Moore Jr. available today? They weren't yesterday. As far as I know, they're not on the injury report. I didn't project them for enough minutes to matter. The KJ Simpson thing has been difficult. He's not close to his like 50 game limit or whatever. But like the last game before the break when LaMelo was out, you got the Payton start. You got Ball basically backing him up. You had Isaiah Wong play 15 minutes. Isaiah Wong's no longer on the team. So I basically projected those minutes to go to Simpson. I projected Ball to play like a handful. I didn't project any of them for enough minutes to matter. And I don't really know how I could unless we got like Seth Curry ruled out and confirmation that Simpson's like the backup center or Simpson is starting or something. So I didn't spend too much time trying to find the answer to that. But the answer, at least for me, is I don't really know because most teams list these guys on the injury report. Like if they're not going to be available, they just put not with team or with G League or whatever. And the Hornets haven't been doing it. SMP said, I feel like there's an understated positive correlation between Payton and Bridges, at least relative to other point guard main scorer combos. Yeah, there probably is since Payton's not scoring dependent and his minutes at least the expectation is that his minutes are still going to increase the closer the game is. Obviously that's not as true for Payton as it is for Bridges because there's plenty of ways this game can be competitive and Elfrid Payton plays like shit and somebody else gets the minutes. But yeah, probably true to some extent. The I guess counterpoint would be Bridges can run the offense too. So, if you get the game where like Bridges really comes through as a playmaker, you just have Elf standing in a corner being completely useless on offense. Like that can happen. But in a game with a spread like this, starters tend to be a little bit more positively correlated too. That's one thing I actually think is really interesting. And again, I don't get paid for this, but just something to point out. It's something that I think is really interesting and I really like about the Sims at SaberSim. If you click on the players, you can actually see the correlation here. And to your point, massive positive correlation between Payton and Miles Bridges. But it's not just a standard correlation where every time you click on Charlotte, it's going to tell you that there's this correlation between the guys. What you actually can see is that in games with big spreads like this, the starters correlate very, very strongly because if Miles Bridges plays really well, then you're getting more minutes, most likely from Payton. You're getting more minutes from Smith. You're getting more minutes from Green. You're getting more minutes from Jokic, etc. So that's something that I just find interesting. Like clicking through correlations in SaberSim, it really shows you the answer, I think, to questions that people tend to ask a lot about game script, about spreads, about blowouts and all of that, and kind of shows you like how you should be grouping guys together, or if you're using a good sim, how guys are naturally going to get grouped together. In games with closer spreads, you get completely different correlations, which you would expect. So to your point, that does show up there. On the other side for Denver, Russell Westbrook is back. Peyton Watson is not. I'm guessing Westbrook starts. I don't know. My guess is that Christian Brown goes back to the bench. You get a starting lineup of Jamal Murray, Russell Westbrook, Michael Porter Jr., Aaron Gordon, and Jokic, with Brown as the first guy off the bench. So I got to 28.5 minutes for Westbrook. I got to 28.5 for Gordon. I got to like 29 for Brown, something like that. 29 for Brown, 34 apiece for Murray and Jokic. Obviously, if this game ends up being competitive, you would expect more. I am curious to see exactly how this rotation goes because we have seen in general Michael Malone run a tighter rotation with Watson and Westbrook out, but now you're getting Westbrook back. So I don't know if you continue to see like Michael Porter Jr. play huge minutes obviously when he's in, or if you get a little bit deeper rotation here. But I ended up getting to like 32 minutes for Porter, And then, I mentioned the minutes for the other main pieces. I think you're probably getting around 24 still from Julian Strawther. Basically, it makes nobody show up as a huge priority. Jokic is getting 14% ownership at 12.5. If I can get to Jokic, great. I have a hard time right now. Like, as you can see, I'm not getting to him. And that's even with, this being a later game. So, like, relatively, Jokic's projection is not getting knocked down as much as other players are for me. This is just a lack of value on the slate thing. And then also not just a lack of value on the slate, but you also in large field tournaments do have to consider the combinations too, where like, yes, Jokic is only projected to be 14% owned, but Jokic lineups are going to look very similar to each other because once you put in a $12,500 Jokic and then you have a slate where there's only a few cheap guys that are even like remotely playable, it becomes difficult to really differentiate within those Jokic lineups. So I think that's something else that is probably keeping me from getting to him right now, but goes without saying, if I can get to more of him, great. I am getting to some Gordon, getting to some Westbrook. They're not projected for any ownership, but Gordon's only 5K, Westbrook 6,200. Again, assuming that we don't get a minutes limit on Westbrook and that he is starting, I am interested in getting to both of them at no ownership. Clearly, Jamal Murray would be fine at no ownership as well if you can get there. Phoenix taking on the Spurs in San Antonio for the Suns. Jalen Bridges is out. Cody Martin is out. Everybody else is back. Bol 4,800, getting 20.5% ownership. I am at 36%. Have him projected for 24.5 minutes. My assumption is that he is staying in the starting lineup. Budenholzer said that he wanted to try that out and see, how it goes. I don't really expect it to last very long, but for now, seems to be the route that they want to go. He played 33.5 minutes last game. You do have Booker back now. You do have Beal back now. So I think expecting, mid-20s in minutes from him is reasonable, but he is still pretty cheap at 4,800. He is a good point per minute guy. So happy to get to him on a slate where you don't have a lot of good value. And then beyond that, if you can get to some Durant, some Booker, that's fine. Tyus Jones is hurt by Bradley Beal coming back. He does play fewer minutes. So probably not getting much of him, probably not getting to too much. Beal at 6,200. Bol seems like the guy that we want to get to the most for the Suns. On the Spurs side, obviously no Wemby. He is out for the rest of the year. No Charles Bassey, no Riley Minix. So you do have a lot of ownership coming into the Spurs. I have a lot of exposure for the Spurs. De'Aaron Fox should have the offense completely running through him. Taking Wemby out obviously opens up a lot of usage. And then you look at the other players, that it could go to. Obviously, you can see Devin Vassell get a little bit more. You can see Chris Paul get a little bit more. But like Sohan's not a super high usage guy. Keldon Johnson, when he's on the floor, probably sees a bump. But De'Aaron Fox should be taking on a bigger role here. Getting 28% ownership. I'm 2x the field. 7,900 is just a good price tag as well. And then you also get point guard and shooting guard eligibility. Not that that's the most valuable combination since they are just both guard spots still, but it does obviously make it a little bit easier to get him into lineups. Devin Vassell is going to look good here at 5,800. Jeremy Sohan, 4,500, looks like a very good value. 32% projected ownership. I'm at 24%. Mamu at 3K with no Bassey, probably at least gets on the floor. Have him projected for like 12 minutes. You can take a shot here or there. If you don't get him, I wouldn't worry about it either. Keldon Johnson, 4K. I might end up getting a little bit higher on his playing time here, but at the very least, I think he's, a dart throw value guy. You could potentially see a little bit more playing time for him. This is one that I might end up adjusting a little bit after the show. And then Chris Paul, again, 5,300, just pretty good value. I'm not getting quite as much as the field right now, but should produce at a higher level without Wemby. Should, have his minutes staggered with De'Aaron Fox. Price tag still looks pretty good. And then on top of all of that too, it is a late game, so you're going to be acting with a lot more information here. And then also it has one of the closest spreads on the slate. So overall, just a very, very appealing Spurs team to get to. And then wrapping things up with the Lakers, no Luka Doncic. LeBron is questionable. I assume he's playing, but who knows? No Maxi Kleber, of course, and then no Jared Vanderbilt. So LeBron, if he plays, looks very, very good. I'm not really sure why he only had a 7% ownership projection when I ran this stuff. That probably is going to come up Maybe it's just because of the Q tag. I don't know. But 10,200 for him, small forward, power forward. This would be another reason, I guess, that I wasn't getting to Giannis, wasn't getting to Jokic. Like if LeBron is actually going to have half the owner or the same ownership as Giannis and half the ownership as Jokic at a cheaper price tag than both, playing without Luka in a good, pretty good spot and playing really well lately too. I'm going to just play a lot of him, better, position than Jokic also. If that ownership does come up, then you'll see my exposure come down and you will probably start to see me play a bit more Giannis, play a bit more Jokic. But with the way ownership was when I ran this before the show, LeBron looked very good. Austin Reeves is going to look better without Luka as well. 8,200, probably going to be staggering with LeBron, I would expect. So you'll be getting plenty of time where Reeves is on the floor with basically no other functioning NBA players, at least as far as scorers go. So he looks pretty good, especially, again, if he's not going to get any ownership. I do think you'll just see Lakers ownership in general come up. Same goes for Jordan Goodwin at 4,100, probably playing around 20 minutes or so. Not any sort of a priority, to answer the question from Doug earlier in chat. I don't think he's a priority, but I think that, he's in the rotation, which he wasn't yesterday. Dorian Finney-Smith at 4,200, just another dart throw, like 4K guy. Nobody else getting ownership here. I wouldn't really expect anybody else to look very good, but LeBron, if he plays, looks good. And then obviously if LeBron's out, you're getting just a lot of value here. Reeves would look really good. Goodwin at that point would look really good. Dalton Connect's minutes would look better. So Rui, probably playing a bunch of minutes. So if LeBron's out, clearly it makes the Lakers look even better. And then finally, wrapping things up with the Blazers, DeAndre Ayton is out. Jeremy Grant is questionable. Scoot Henderson is questionable. Robert Williams is questionable. We should get Donovan Clingan starting, which at 5,600 makes him look like a pretty solid value at center, right around the field at 10%. Anthony Simon, 6,500. Denny Avdia, 6,300. I'm not getting crazy amounts of them, but I am like 2x the field. Wookie said no Milton. I assume he's behind Goodwin. I do think it's close. In the last game that Goodwin played, you had them play similar minutes in the first half. Goodwin checked in and then checked back out in the second half, and then they both just played garbage time. But I think Goodwin is ahead of Milton, probably. I think they're similar plays. One thing I will say, as far as in the trend of the entire NBA season, me just being a day early on guys, I did try and get some Shake Milton garbage time yesterday on the showdown slate at no ownership. Obviously it didn't happen. So it would be pretty fitting if he's just his sixth man today or something weird and goes nuts. But I think Goodwin and Milton are, if LeBron is in, basically the same play, except for I would give an edge to Goodwin, especially if the ownership ends up being low. If you get a situation where Goodwin's getting 25% ownership and Milton's getting 1, then I think it becomes interesting. But for right now, I think the most likely thing is that Goodwin is ahead of him, even though I'm not super confident in that. So Avdia, Simons, Clingan all look pretty good to me. Jeremy Grant, if he's in, obviously looks fine as well at 5,500. One other thing to keep in mind here with the Blazers is that this is another one of those teams like the Knicks, but obviously a little bit less crazy than the Knicks, where usually if they're missing main pieces, they don't go too much deeper into the bench. They typically give more minutes to their starters. So if you're to get Jeremy Grant out or Scoot Henderson out or both of those guys out, you should be pretty aggressive with getting more minutes to Simons, to Avdia, to Kamara, to Shadon Sharp. So I think that's something important to keep in mind, and it is something that potentially you're going to be able to take advantage of late swap to get to. In the most recent game for Portland where Clingan started, he did play 31 minutes too. So I think this is a spot also where these last couple of games, I still need to, switch from my baseline projections to ones that I've actually paid more attention to. I might end up getting a little bit higher than Clingan here, given that it is a close spread. And I think that he is likely to get to 30 minutes, but either way, I think he's going to look like a pretty good value at 5,600. How come I get the feeling there will be some news dump in the next couple hours that will cause us all to scramble? Because it's NBA, and that's almost definitely going to happen. You could have a completely clean injury report, and it would still be 50% to happen because that's how it goes. But that's all I have for you on this one. Pretty fun 9-game slate. Welcome back to the second half of the NBA season. Thank you for checking out the show. Don't forget to hit the thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, all that stuff. And I will see you back here again tomorrow.